All right, going live. I had to figure out how to get YouTube to work. I've never gone live on something that I've scheduled ahead of time. So this is Ask a Scientist, and basically once a week I want to get back to addressing the questions I get from my students and anybody else I interact with through Facebook and YouTube. And one of the topics that I want to talk about today is glyphosate. It's been in the news a lot lately, and glyphosate, does it cause cancer? Is it bad for us? A lot of people are like, hey, if it's so safe, can you drink it? So let's talk about glyphosate and let's answer that question. Why do I not really care about glyphosate on my food? So first of all, let's talk about this. Oh yeah, Monsanto is not paying me anything. There's no shill bucks here at all. But basically, glyphosate is an organic compound. I think I drew it right here. It's basically got a phosphorus group here. We can draw it and I can put it right here in front of you. And what you can see is there's a phosphorus group here with a carbon, nitrogen, carbon, and we got our carboxyl group there. So this is an organic compound. Specifically, it's a phosphoorganic compound. And it was discovered in 1970 by a chemist at Monsanto. And they realized that, hey, this thing could be a weed killer. So by 1974, Monsanto brought it to market known as Roundup. So glyphosate is this organophosphorus compound that is the active ingredient of Roundup. So here's what it does. In plants are amazing chemical factories. I mean, they have no essential amino acids or essential fats. Believe it or not, plants can make every single organic molecule they need by fixing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, taking in water from their roots, and absorbing a few minerals and electrolytes from their roots. They make everything they needed, including all of their 20 amino acids. But what glyphosate does is it inhibits their ability to make 3 different types of amino acids. Now remember, all life uses the same 20 amino acids. So if you're not making some, then you can't make all the proteins you need. So basically, glyphosate blocks this enzyme from working that makes tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. These are the aromatic amino acids if anybody's interested. So since the plant can't make these things, the plant eventually dies because it can't make the proteins it needs to survive. So the problem is whenever you applied Roundup back in the 1970s and through the early 80s, you gotta watch out, it'll kill everything except for a few things that were resistant to the glyphosate. However, in a remarkable fate here, or not remarkable fate, but some genetic engineering, what Monsanto did next is create Roundup ready crops. Now this is pretty cool. They genetically engineered these plants to not be affected by glyphosate. And this was pretty cool because now you could plant your crops and you could spray an herbicide on it, and basically this herbicide would kill all the weeds and not kill your crops. That's good. And one of the things is here, this really helps farmers out quite a bit, actually. We know that agriculture uses the most water in the world, and they were spraying lots of herbicides and adding lots of fertilizers to their fields. And by using Roundup and getting rid of all the weeds, now all of a sudden our crops don't have to compete with other weeds growing in there for water or for nutrients. So that led to less water use and less fertilizer use, which is actually good, making things cheaper. So not so bad. And I'll talk about some other things that is good about Roundup here in a second. But the first crop that was introduced as Roundup ready was soybeans. But now, oh my gosh, you can get corn, canola, sugar beets, cotton, alfalfa, and wheat, and all of these things are now Roundup ready. So as you can imagine, Roundup is one of the most popular herbicides in the world. And of course, because it's made by Monsanto, they're not Monsanto anymore, they're in trouble. It got bought out by Bayer. But they've been heavily demonized for this glyphosate, and it's come into we all see it now in the news about juries awarding huge sums of money to people that got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and other cancers, or at least that one brought about by the use of glyphosate. So here we are. People are supposedly getting cancer from it. You Google this on the web, and yeah, it seems like it's like the worst thing out there. Well, I'm not really worried about glyphosate, especially in my diet. I don't drink glyphosate on a regular basis. Um, we can have an acceptable dose of about 1.75 milliliters per kilogram, which is not very much. The EU has a lower dose. And basically, whenever we've gone out and tested our plants and our produce in the stores for glyphosate, it almost always comes back well below those levels. And here's one thing that's important. Now, somebody said, "Hey, Tom, if you're going to talk about why glyphosate is so safe, why don't you drink some?" Well, toxicity is dose related, right? I'm not going to drink glyphosate to prove it's safe. Just like I'm not going to go drink 6 liters of water in an hour. I mean, that's a lethal dose of water actually, or something near that. If I went and chugged 2 gallons of water in an hour, I might die of hyponatremia. My electrolytes will get out of balance. I love caffeine. I mean, I drink it every day. Here's my soda. Mm, yummy. And I've got lots of cups from Witch Wish to prove that I'm always drinking soda, which is probably not the healthiest thing for me. But I'm not going to go take 3 grams of caffeine just because I can easily handle a few milligrams. But I can't handle 3 grams. I'd have a heart attack. I also like a beer. I'll go to the bar and have a couple beers. No problem. Um, I'm not going to take 13 shots of whiskey in an hour either because that might kill me as well. So one thing that's very important about anything, any chemical that you might be worried about, the toxicity is in the dose. So whereas water, I mean, I have to have water. You drink enough of it, it will kill you. So anything like this can be lethal at a certain amount. So the toxicity is in the dose. And what we see in our environment, what we are exposed to in the foods we eat, from both organic and non-organic foods, um, I don't get enough in there to ever affect me. It's just not a problem. And so I'm not really worried about it. Now, this question about does glyphosate cause cancer? It was the IARC came out, so it was probably cancerous. Well, yeah, they probably should reevaluate that because, like I said, if you take anything in high enough amounts, with the exception of water, well, water will kill you too. But lots of chemicals can cause cancer at the right amounts. But even despite that, there's real no peer-reviewed evidence that it does cause cancer. And one thing I always tell my friends and my students is, hey, just because a jury awarded a huge sum of money to some guy that got cancer and they blamed it on glyphosate doesn't count as scientific evidence that it actually does cause cancer. That's a jury of peers. I always laugh that if I ever go to get on a jury or I have a verdict against me, my peers, I want scientists up there, right? Because they think very differently than people that are not biochemists. And the other thing about, does glyphosate cause cancer? Cancer is an incredibly complex thing. There are over 100 different things that we call cancer. So cancer is a catch-all term for a number of diseases, but basically it's an uncontrollable growth of cells that spreads to your body and into your organs and tissues, and eventually will cause organ damage, leading to organ failure. At that point, you die. And there's lots of things that cause cancer. I mean, I just told you I drink alcohol. Well, if you drink too much, guess what? That leads to cancer. Hey, do you get out in the sun a lot? You know what? That causes cancer too. In fact, it causes one of the most preventable cancers, skin cancer. And you eat a lot of processed foods and fat and sugar, and do you not exercise? Guess what? That also leads to cancer. And if you smoke, well, I mean, if you smoke, that is the most preventable cause of cancer in the world because basically smoking causes most numbers of cancer, and it's just bad. So, I mean, if you're doing any of those things and you're worried about a little bit of pesticide residue in your food, you're worried about the wrong thing. So the other thing, so no, glyphosate basically, there's no evidence that the doses you would get it in your foods that it would ever cause cancer. In fact, there's just no evidence to support that. This, regardless of what courtroom decisions say. And there are far more things in our world that do cause cancer, like excessive drinking, being out in the sun too much, bad diet. The Western diet of sugar, fat is bad for us, and other environmental toxins when we don't regulate toxins in our environment at certain levels, that also causes cancer as well. Another thing, people say, well, hey, does it harm our gut bacteria? And the answer is not really. I mean, yeah, you've got gut bacteria that can make those 3 amino acids through the shikimic pathway the same way a plant does, but those bacteria live in your gut. And I don't know about you, but I have a pretty healthy diet. They're getting all the tryptophan and tyrosine and phenylalanine they could possibly need. And the fact that I drink diet soda, oh my gosh, they're getting lots of phenylalanine because remember, aspartame is phenylalanine and aspartic acid. So I'm just not worried about it here. So it doesn't really harm our gut bacteria. I'm just not getting enough of it to ever worry about. And then here's a couple things that I want you to think about, as we demonize these large corporations. And I'm not saying that they're not to be held accountable for other things and that they have their own issues, like trying to make money at the expense of everything. But let's take another look at glyphosate. It actually has benefits to the environment. Now, I'm not saying, glyphosate makes plants grow better, but here's how it's good. Without these broad spectrum herbicides, what happens is before Roundup Ready plants came out, farmers would do a lot of tilling on their property or on their fields. And that tilling, basically, you take the dirt, you turn it over. Well, that causes some problems. If your soil is all loose and not compacted and it rains and you don't have any ground cover, guess what? All that soil will run off very quickly into your streams and lakes and other water bodies. That turbidity causes lots of problems for ecosystems, for aquatic ecosystems. And if you've been fertilizing your field, guess what? It also causes lots of problems by causing eutrophication of those systems by excessive algae growth. So the other thing is, and if your soil is bare and it's windy, guess what? You can lose your topsoil. And any farmer will tell you the topsoil where you grow the plants that contains all the nutrients in it is very, very important, and it's bad when you lose that. And so by using Roundup, we can have more no-till agriculture. So this is very good for soil conservation. And as I said earlier, it also helps out because if you're not having to water all the weeds out there along with your crops, you use less water. And because you're not competing for nutrients in the soil, you use less fertilizers. And it's also been shown that, that it's reduced our use of herbicides and pesticides overall. So there's some clear benefits to it. It's definitely made farming a lot easier for many, many people. And the other nice thing about glyphosate is it binds to the soil. So it doesn't really run off so well into other water bodies in our groundwater, and microbes break it down rather quickly. I mean, you can detect it a year later, but not very much of it, and definitely not enough to cause any harm. Now, that being said, does it have any drawbacks? Well, I mean, humans, we have to grow food to eat. I mean, there's just no way about that. So we've got to figure out ways to grow food as economically as possible. And yeah, if you're going in there and you're killing all the weeds and creating large monoculture crops, that causes problems too. That causes a loss of diversity, both in the flowers and in the pollinators. And we know that having a lot of pollinators and pollinator diversity is incredibly important. So if we're spraying fields and wiping out all of the wildflowers and other things we call weeds are really just flowers out of place. Seriously. We need to make sure that we create other areas that do have a lot of diversity to maintain those weeds, so to speak, and also the different species of pollinators that all of our crops rely on to pollinate the flowers so that they'll set fruit. Another problem is weed resistance. Hey, I mean, anytime you start spraying an herbicide or a pesticide, life evolves. Eventually, you're going to get the evolution of resistant plants. But that doesn't mean we should ban glyphosate just because you will get weed resistance. I mean, that's kind of silly, right? Because we know it helps out with farming. But one of the cool things is that, or a market analysis, basically, the way I understand economics, if all the weeds out there became resistant to glyphosate, they would no longer use it. That's kind of a moot point. And So yeah, so glyphosate's not as bad as we think it is. And in fact, it's actually, in terms of other herbicides, it's much less toxic to us and into the environment as well. And like I said, that being said, I'm just not worried about glyphosate on my food. But please don't ask me to drink glyphosate to prove that it's not, to prove that it's safe, because like I said, the toxicity is in the dose. And if you think you're going to do that, I mean, that's just not going to happen. So don't drink glyphosate and don't get completely overexposed to it. That's like saying, hey, the sun causes cancer. Well, I walk around in the sun every day. Doesn't mean I'll lay out with my shirt off for hours every day trying to get tan, because that will not do my body well. Okay, so I hope I explained why glyphosate, why I don't really care about it in my food that much, but actually I think that it's a good thing. I always advocate that the guy that invented it probably should have gotten the Nobel Prize for his discovery of glyphosate, and how well, and the team of scientists that created Roundup Ready plants. And no, I'm not working for Monsanto on this one. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, we can always check them out. Nobody dropped any questions in. So stay tuned next week for my next Ask a Scientist, about where I'll discuss another topic. I might pick up genetically modified crops. That's another good one. So I don't care about those either, except that they help out the environment. Okay,